So, we're going to finish Joan Johnston's surrender. And a little bit of news. I have an old tank top on, one of my favorites, by the way. And some more news. I went on to eBay and bought the other 2 books in this series. Actually, 4 books in this series. But so it'd be a total of 3 because this is 4. And I'm like going, I got a steal of a bargain, and I can't wait to share those with you after I get them read. But let's finish Surrender. So, page 392. I want to walk with a cane. Is that asking too much? It is if you end up torturing yourself with cramps. I'm afraid. He wanted to say more, but the words were caught in his throat. Did he dare tell her how scared he was, that he'd never walk again without some sort of aid, that he didn't think that his leg would ever be strong enough for him to go back to work as a firefighter, that he had no idea what he would do if he couldn't fight fires? She met his gaze. You're the bravest man I know, Brian. You can do this. I can't. He felt another spasm take hold and bit back a scream. It took him a moment to realize that she was gripping his half-injured, his half-ugly, deformed mess of an injured calf in both hands as hard as she could, and it was easing the spasms. Oh, God. Tag, hold on. Keep doing what you're doing. It's helping. It took another 30 seconds, a lifetime, for that spasm to pass. He clenched his teeth and held his breath the whole time. It took him a moment to realize the pain was gone. He sought out the breath of air he'd been holding and collapsed back against the chair. He lowered his gaze to her hands, which were now knotted into helpless fists into his lap. Thank you. I'm going to leave the towel wrapped around your calf. This is page 293. Moving forward. Page 300. A grin spread across his face, showing off his perfect teeth. What can I say? I'm that kind of guy who can fall for a woman in a cave full of bat guano and bear scat. She laughed. She imagined a morning like this, without the morning sickness, of course, where they 2 of them would laugh together as they started their day. He had been tender, kind, and thoughtful, and even funny. That was quite a combination in a man. She opened her mouth to tell him he was going to be a father, but shut it again. I'll tell him when he's off his crutches. Page 301. Brian, you need to go to rehab. I'll call and change my appointment for later in the day. Let's get you into bed. I'll see if I can whip up some chicken soup to make you feel better. You don't know how to cook. Maybe not, but I'm pretty good with a delivery menu. The only thing that would have made this morning more perfect was if Brian had been well enough to sweep her into his arms and carry her back to bed. She was happy enough to have him thump his way into her bedroom on his crutches and pull the covers up to tuck them under her chin. He finished by kissing her on the brow. Just in case you have a virus and not food poisoning. Probably wise now if it was the coronavirus. Just saying. Anyway, she wanted to tell him she felt just fine, that she wouldn't mind if he joined her in bed, but she had to continue the charade until he knew the secret she was keeping from him. I'm okay now, Brian. Really, you should go to therapy. He sat down on the bed beside her. I don't know what I would have done last night if you hadn't been there to help me, Tag. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Let me return the favor. All right. Tag had never had a man wait on her hand and foot for an entire day. Who has? Especially one with the only one good leg. She fell asleep early in the afternoon around the time Brian was headed to therapy. She was taking a nap every day when he was gone and wouldn't notice when she woke up. Page 302. He was sitting on the opposite side of the bed with his back against the pillow. His legs were stretched on the covers. She yawned and said, I must have fallen asleep right in the middle of whatever you were saying before you left. You did. I'm so sorry. You obviously needed the rest. Are you feeling better? Taylor sat up and waited for the nausea to rise. When it didn't, she smiled and said, I'm good. Thanks for all the TLC, Brian. I think I did well enough to get up and make us some dinner. So it's not a virus. She shook her head. I feel fine. Good. Then I can do this. He put his hands on her waist and lifted her across the bed until she was seated facing him, her legs straddling his hips. His hand caught her nape and drew her close for a gentle kiss. I've been wanting to do that all day. But refrained so you couldn't catch whatever I had? She asked with an arched brow. You have to read what happens next there. Okay, moving forward. Hi, Peanut. It's a peanut brick. Page 317. If she was guilty of keeping the news that he was going to be a father from Brian, he was equally guilty of disappearing without a word. He could have called. He could have sent her a text. He could have shown up at her door, for that matter. He kept his distance, so she kept hers. Oh, that stubborn Pride and Prejudice stuff draws me like a moth to a flame. Page 327. I could have invited Tag, Brian thought. I still could, but what would she think of getting an invitation that would be out of the blue? He hadn't called her in 6 weeks, and she'd want some sort of explanation why he was calling now. I miss you, I need you, I love you is all in his mind. He wasn't ready to say those things yet. He wanted to show her that he'd met the challenge she'd given him. He wanted to qualify as a firefighter first, and he wanted the chance to spend time with her before they had to face his father and brothers as a couple. Better to let well enough alone. Brian smiled at his father and said, "Are you going to carve that bird or sit there looking at it?" Angus carved the bird, and Brian ate till he was stuffed as turkey and retired to his great room with Aidan to watch football. Angus disappeared into his office. "I'm proud of you," Aidan said during a break in the play. Brian groaned and rubbed his belly. "You should be. I think I ate half the bird. You know what I mean. I know you had it in you to beat this thing. You couldn't have been a smoke jumper if you were the kind of man who quit when the going got tough." "I might have quit," Brian admitted, "if Tag hadn't given me a swift kick in the butt. After what I saw when we found you in the wilderness." Again, that was 327, 328, and 329. "I have a lot of respect for her. Sounds like you do too, if you made all this effort to get her approval. Tag made me want to take a good look at myself and decide what I really wanted. And that's being a firefighter?" Brian nodded. "And Tag. I want Tag. 6 months ago I would have said marrying a Greyhawk woman was a long shot. I don't know what to think anymore. I never have believed the old man would have to agree to a couple of Greyhawks for supper. Except they are not Greyhawks anymore, are they?" "They're Flynn wives," Brian said. "Speaking of which, is your wife coming to supper?" Aidan hissed in a breath. "Keep your voice down. There's no one here but us. What's happening between the two of you?" "Nothing, which is the problem." "She hasn't forgiven you?" "Not yet. Do you think she will?" "I'm working on it." "I'm really sorry, Aidan. It's water under the bridge. Are you going to see her today?" Aidan shook his head. "Drop it, okay?" Brian held up both hands. "It's dropped. The football game wasn't over yet, and the supper was a long way off." But when Brian heard a commotion in the kitchen, "Who do you suppose that is?" "Heck if I know," Aidan replied. A moment later, Connor, Devon entered the great room. Connor plopped onto the couch next to Brian, and Devon settled himself on the floor next to Aidan's chairs with the legs sprawled out in front of him. "Where are your wives?" Aidan asked. "Pip is upstairs in my old room taking a nap," Devon replied. "Eve took the kids out to the barn to see the new batch of kittens," Connor said. Brian hadn't taken his eyes off the screen since the Broncos were playing, and they were still undefeated. But he had an odd feeling that he was being watched. He glanced sideways and saw Connor looking at him with something like awe. He shifted his gaze to Devon and saw confusion and disbelief. He shot a look at Aidan, whose gaze was now still focused on the great game. He turned back to Devon and said, "Why are you staring at me like that?" And when Brian confronted Devon, Aidan turned and looked at the two youngest brothers with question in his eyes. "You don't know, do you?" Devon said. "I don't think he does," Connor said, never taking his eyes off Brian. "Know what?" Brian said. "Stop the BS and tell me what's going on." Devon and Connor exchanged glances. "Do you know what this is all about?" Brian asked Aidan. "Beats me. What's going on, you guys? Spill." "You want to tell him?" Devon asked. Page 330 and 331. "Maybe you better do it," Connor said. "Tell me what?" Brian snapped. "Out with it now." "Taylor's pregnant," Devon blurted. Brian's opened his mouth to say, "That's impossible," and closed it again. When had it happened? In the cave? Surely he could have noticed the signs when he'd been living with her. If it had happened that long ago, she would have... Brian thought back to the rounded belly that she had pressed against him that night that he spent with her. Had she been pregnant then? Had the extra curve in that her belly been a baby growing inside her, or had she gotten pregnant, God forbid, the night that he walked out on her? He closed his eyes and groaned. It dawned on him that his brothers might be mistaken. His eyes snapped open, and then he focused his gaze on Connor. "How do you know that Tag's pregnant?" "Hell, Brian, she announced it at Christmas dinner in front of God and everybody." "How did she seem when she said it?" Brian asked. "Was she mad, or sad, or glad?" "Hard to tell," Connor admitted. "She was late getting there, and she didn't say much during dinner. It happened when she was leaving. Her twin said something about being relieved that Taylor had broken up with you because she couldn't have stood one more Flint at the table. And Taylor said there'd been another Flint at the table the whole time, the one in her belly, Devon finished. All the blood drained from Brian's face. He thought he might faint. He, in his mind, was thinking, I'm going to be a father. Why hadn't Tag said something? Why had she told her family before she told him? What did it mean? And Lord in heaven, what should he do now? Page 333. The silence in her bedroom that evening as she pulled the covers up around her shoulders were deafening. She'd gone to bed at 10, unwilling to maintain the forlorn hope that Brian would appear on her doorstep. If he hadn't come or contacted her by now, hours and hours after he must have heard the news, he wasn't coming. To say that she was devastated by Brian's behavior was to underestimate her feelings. Taylor felt as though she'd been poleaxed. Her chest ached, her stomach was tied up in knots, she felt alternately feverish and chilled to the bone. There was no reason other than being on her deathbed that could excuse Brian's failure to reach out to her. Again, this is page 333. I don't remember telling you that. She sat bolt upright in bed. Maybe he'd been so elated by the news of her pregnancy that he'd been driving too fast on her way there and had swerved off the icy roads, crashed, and was even now in surgery to save his life. Someone would have called you, she thought. Admit it, Tag. Brian didn't come because he doesn't want the baby. He doesn't want you. You've been kidding yourself. You're the most unlovable person on this planet. How could you have believed that Brian Flynn had any intention of spending his life with you? Okay, and then I'm going to let you find out who came to her door. But it wasn't Brian. Okay. Page 348. Leah, is that you? Is everything all right? Aiden asked in a sleep, husky voice. I need to see you. She heard the sheets rustle, something thump on the carpet before he said, It's nearly midnight. I know where I need to see you. Can you meet me? Where? The usual place. When they'd been seeing each other clandestinely, they met near an isolated stock tank halfway between the two ranches. The road to the usual place must have had a foot of snow and drifts a lot higher than that, he said. It'll be damn near impossible to get there. She wanted to meet on neutral ground. She wanted to meet somewhere freezing cold where the air would cloud each breath so there would be no chance of intimacy. She knew as well as he did that getting to that stock tank was going to be a pain in the butt. She was testing him. If Aiden didn't love her enough to get up in the middle of the night and meet her somewhere inconvenient, he didn't love her enough to do what she was going to ask him to do. She waited to see what he would say. After 10 seconds silent, he said, Dress warm, I'll be there in half an hour. Page 349. We're getting there. The ringing phone had woken Aiden from a sound sleep. He almost hadn't answered it. He looked at the time and groaned and recognized Leah's number and answered. As he sat up, he juggled the phone and dropped it. The last time they'd spoken, she told him their marriage was over. She ordered him not to call anymore and told him that she would be contacting him through the lawyer. Her lawyer would then send him annulment papers, and he'd spend the holiday in the depths of despair. And yet, with Christmas not quite over, she extended an olive branch, offering to meet him in the middle of the night. When he hung up the phone, Aiden had more questions than answers. Had she changed her mind? Was he going to get another chance to plead his case? Something must have happened. He had no idea why. Leah wanted to meet in the middle of the night or nowhere on a frigid, moonless night, but nothing was going to keep him away, not even occasional 4-foot drifts he suspected were blocking the road. Page 350. To make sure that he didn't get stuck in the snow, Aiden drove a pickup with a snow blade attached to the grill. If he ran into a deep snow, he could then plow himself a way through to Leah. A smile flickered across his face when he arrived at stock tank and saw Leah had driven a pickup with a snowplow attached as well. She was sitting in the cab with the engine running to stay warm. The instant he arrived, she shut it off and stepped outside. He left his lights on so he could see where he was going, and trekked through 2-foot deep snow to reach her. It would be warmer to have this conversation in your truck. This won't take long, she said. Do you still want me for your wife? Do you need to ask? When she made a face, he said, yes, of course, always. He felt his throat knot with emotion. He didn't believe she'd ever stop loving him. She simply stopped trusting him because he lied to her by omission. If she gave him a chance, he'd spend the rest of the lifetime proving that he was an honorable man. She thought that he was from the first moment they fell in love with him. That she fell in love with him. Be awful if somebody else fell in love with him too. Anyway. You can have me, she said, but there's something I want from you first. His heart was suddenly thundering in his chest. Name it. I want you to get Angus to call off his vendetta against my father. He can start with easing his chokehold on the banker who holds King's note on the South American land. Aiden's heartbeat had even harder with this time with panic. Page 351. His father had spent half his life getting his foot on King's neck. He wasn't about to ease up the pressure, not for anyone or anything. You're asking the impossible, Leah. If you want me in your life, you'll make it happen. That's all I came to say. Wait. He caught her by the arm, and she turned away. The deep snow caused her to stumble and nearly fall. He took a step and wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. She hid her face against his shearling coat, refusing to look at him. Leah, he pleaded, look at me, please. She lifted her face to his and saw the pain and fear in his eyes, and in her eyes. His throat ached with unshed tears. He came here with such high hopes. Her request had dashed them. Ask me for something else, he said. There's nothing else I need. What about me, Leah? Don't you even need me a little bit? Would it be so terrible to let me help you carry some of your burdens that you bear? You can help me most by changing your father's mind. You really do want a Christmas miracle, don't you? He felt helpless against the pleading look in her eyes. He sighed and said, I'll try, Leah. That's all I can promise. He felt her body lose its rigidity as she sank against him. Two bulky coats separated them, but his memory was good enough to remember every curve of the woman in his arms. Page 352. Aiden slowly lowered his head to give Leah a chance to turn away if she didn't want what was about to happen. He was a starving man, and she was a feast that he'd been denied too long. His gloved hands framed her face as he plundered her mouth, taking the sustenance he craved and giving back the nourishment she seemed to need every bit as much. She pulled away far too soon, her plumbed breaths rapid and uneven. Aiden, please, I can't. I don't. She pulled completely free and stared up at him with confusion as she felt showing on her face. He reached out to caress her face, but she brushed his hand away. All right, Leah, I can wait. It might be a very long wait if he couldn't change his father's mind. Just don't forget how much I love you, don't forget how much I need you, and don't forget how good we are together. Her chin quivered as she said, Merry Christmas, Aiden. He swallowed over the knot in his throat and answered, Merry Christmas, Leah. He watched her struggle through the deep snow back to her truck. It started up with a roar, and she backed her way out and took off, her spinning wheels throwing up sheets of powdery snow. He got one last glimpse of her tear-streaked face in his headlights before she was gone. He got back in his truck, heading home, slamming the steering wheel with frustration as he realized the task she'd set before him. Why is she doing this? He ranted. She might as well have asked me to hand her the deed to the Lucky Seven. I have about as much chance of tearing that out of my father's unshakable grip as I have of accomplishing the impossible task she set for me. Page 353. What plea could he make that would sway his father and convince him to forego his revenge? Would he tell him the truth? Tell him you want your wife back in your arms? Unfortunately, even though his happiness depended on having Leah in his life, he didn't think that the argument would hold much sway with his father. Angus would applaud the fact that he'd gotten rid of one of the king's brats out of his son's life. What else could he say? What else could he do? How in heaven's name was he going to get to thwart his father's revenge? Moving forward. We're about done, though. And you get a rating tonight. Page 370. Matt doesn't own Kingdom Come yet. I don't intend that he ever should, married or not. I intend to manage the ranch when he's gone. You know, the Lucky Seven will be mine eventually, he said. I need to live there. I know. How do you propose we resolve this little problem? Where do you suggest we raise our kids?" His lips twisted. "Assuming we're married, of course." "Well, when Kingdom Come is mine, you have control of Lucky Seven. We'll merge into 2 ranches." He looked at her, stunned. "Our fathers," she interrupted in a steely voice. "Our fathers have messed up our lives plenty. I plan to consolidate my position and get my rights to Kingdom Come in writing." Page 371. "Once you've done the same thing at the Lucky Seven, what's going to keep you from doing whatever we want? There would be no question of you living at your ranch and me living at mine. We'd be living at ours." Aiden whistled. "You think big, little lady. By the way, my father thinks I'm wooing you. You will be. He wants you to be living at the Lucky Seven when we marry. That's his price for taking foot off your father's neck. I will, when it's merged with Kingdom Come. He's going to want to see our courtship progress. You can bring me to dinner. I promise to bat my eyes at you." He laughed. "I promise to be suitably impressed." She grabbed the lapels of his sheepskin coat. "I need you to be honest with me from now on, Aiden. You need to prove yourself trustworthy. Just be aware that if you back off, if we end our relationship, my father will back on his promise as well. Don't say I didn't warn you. I hear you, I understand, but I can't commit to a marriage I think will fail, even to save my father. Fair enough. Just tell me what I have to do to make you trust me again." She looked troubled. "I don't know, Aiden. I guess we'll just have to spend time together and see what happens." They had plenty to do while they quote-unquote dated. It could take months of planning to get legal possession of their respective ranches. Aiden would have to convince Angus to cede him in the Lucky Seven sooner than his father might have. Page 372. Wished. She would have to evict Matt and get him to transfer and get King to transfer ownership of Kingdom Come back to her. It wouldn't be easy, but the result would give them both what they wanted. She held out her hand and said, quote, "Do we have a deal?" He pulled off her glove and his own, and then took her cold hand in his warm one. "Remind me never to be on the wrong side of you, Miss Mrs. Flynn. You have a positively devious mind, and yes, we have a deal. I suggest we seal it with a handshake." He shook her hand. "And a kiss." Leah warned herself not to let her emotions get out of control. It was only a kiss, but when Aiden's lips touched hers, she felt light as air. Her heart threatened to beat its way past her rib cage, and inside did somersaults of joy. Aiden broke the kiss before she was ready for it to end. He looked into her eyes and said, "You and I, more well matched than you know, baby." He winked and said, "I don't give up on things that I want, either." Oh, that poor Aiden. He's having to jump through so many hoops. But we'll find out in the next book if they make it or not, because this story is all about Brian and Taylor. Okay. Page 376. "I passed!" Brian could hardly believe it. The chief headed toward him, holding the stopwatch so he could see his time. 4 minutes, 58 seconds, she said. "Congratulations, Brian, and welcome back." Brian was shocked at how close he'd come to failing, and so very glad that he passed. He felt the grin coming and let it spread across his face. Meanwhile, I can't say this word, surreptitiously manipulated his injured leg, circling it at the ankle and easing his toe upward to alleviate the cramp that had attacked with a vengeance. His friend slapped him on the back and uttered words of congratulations, but he was busy looking for that one face he wanted to see again. He finally caught sight of Tag glancing over her shoulder as she hurried away. This is what he's thinking now. If she made the effort to come and cheer me on, why is she leaving without speaking to me? He wanted to run after her, but the running was out of the question at the moment. Besides, Brian realized he couldn't walk away without celebrating with his friends who come to support him. It was several hours before he was free to go after Tag, and Brian headed immediately for her home on the mountain. He found her outside shoveling snow from the sidewalk, which was never used, because she always entered the house from the garage. Was she shoveling the snow because she'd known he might show up and didn't want him in the house? Page 377. She acted surprised to see him, as though she hadn't been standing in the crowd urging him on when he took his work capacity test. He looked for the signs of her pregnancy, but she was wearing a bulky coat and that concealed her belly. "Is this something a pregnant woman should be doing?" he asked. She turned her back and looked to him as she scooped a shovelful of snow and threw it into the yard. "I'm not speaking to you. In fact, have to be a very old lady before I ever speak to you again." He laughed. "You have a strange way of staying mum. I heard you, Tag. I knew you were there." She turned to face him. Her eyes were flashing. "That was different. Word was all over town that you were taking that test. I called Chief Warren and she said I could come over and I'd cheer for anyone who managed to come back from an injury as bad as yours." "But it wasn't just anyone you cheered for," he said in a tender voice. "It was me." She threw down the shovel, turned her back on him, and marched toward the front door. He skipped-hopped to catch up with her, amazed to realize that his bad leg was free of pain and working fine. "I'm sorry." She whirled and poked a finger in his chest. "You should be, walking out without a word, not calling as though I no longer existed, just because I told you a few home truths." Page 378. Truths I needed to hear. Exactly. She was beautiful when she was angry, and knowing she carried his child only made her more so. "How could you not call me last night? You had to know I would be expecting to hear from you." "I'm an idiot," he admitted. "A stupid idiot." "Well, if the shoe fits." "Who loves you?" he added. Her features crumpled and tears pooled in her eyes. She scrubbed them away. "These stupid hormones make me cry all the time over nothing." "I love you, Tag." "You're just saying that because I'm pregnant with your child. I'm saying it because I mean it. I'm saying it because I want to marry you and raise our children together." Her eyes opened wide with surprise. "How do you know it's twins?" Brian's jaw dropped. "Twins?" "Well, shoot, you didn't know." She turned and marched away. She reached the covered front porch, and Brian caught up with her again. He took her in his arms and swung her around so their bodies collided. He pulled her close and said, "Will you marry me, Tag?" "Why should I marry a man who walks out, then stays gone without a word for 6 weeks? Why should I marry a man who doesn't call, even to say hello, when he finds out that he got me pregnant?" Guilty of everything. There's no excuse for the way I acted. Page 379. "Then why did you do it, Brian?" "That isn't how a man is supposedly in love behaves." "It isn't? What if he knew you were right and that he'd been acting like a coward? What if he wanted to prove himself before he came back to you? What if he wanted to be worthy of your respect and your love?" She pressed her forehead against his chest. "Is that true?" He put his forefinger underneath her chin to raise her face for his kiss. He touched her lips reverently with his own. "Every word of it. Please say yes, Tag." "If you love me, I suppose I'll marry you." "If I love you," he picked her up and whirled her around in a circle. "I love you so very much I'll be saying those words when I'm an old, old man." He set her down and looked into her eyes. "There's something you haven't said." She looked up at him. Her face flushed. "You don't have to ask, Brian. I know what you'd want to hear, and I didn't withhold the words on purpose. I've just been waiting for the right moment to say them." "But she didn't say them." "Is there some reason you're not speaking?" "I have a confession to make." He lifted a questioning brow. "I've been a coward too." She met his gaze earnestly and said, "I've been afraid to believe that what my heart has been telling me. Afraid to believe that you could actually really love me." She put her fingertips to his lips to silence his protest. Page 380. Then looked into his eyes and said, "Brian, I love you more than—" He cut her off with a kiss, sweeping her into his arms and holding her tight, wanting her to know that he would never let her go, that he was there for the long haul, and that he would still love her when he was old and gray and needed to walk with a cane. He broke that kiss and began unbuttoning her coat so he could get his hands on her. "Just how pregnant are you?" She laughed, put her hands over his as he caressed her round belly. 18 weeks. 4.5 months? "I've already missed too much of these babies' lives," he said. "I don't intend to miss another day." "What kind of wedding do you want?" "Nothing fancy," she said, "but I'd like my family to be there." "I'd like mine to be there too. First challenge of our lives together. Think we can make it happen?" She grinned. "If we can survive a jump into the inferno, 7 days trapped in a cave, and 4 more days in the wilderness, not to mention months of rehab for you, a little thing like a wedding between one king's brats and one of those, quote, those awful Flynn boys should be in a piece of cake." Brian laughed and hugged her close. "Can you make mine chocolate?" So that's all you get. You don't get to hear about the wedding. You don't get to hear anything else. We're going to read the acknowledgments. We're going to read the note from the author. And then you're getting a rating. Acknowledgments. I owe a great many people thanks for helping me craft this novel. First and foremost, I want to thank my editor, Shauna Summers, who always urges me to find heart of the book. Once I get something down on paper, helps me make it better. I'm eternally grateful for the support I receive from Jenna Watchell, and I'm indebted to Lynn Androssi for the amazing covers she designs for my books. I also want to thank the marketing and publicity folks at Dell for getting my books on the shelves and keeping them there. My King's Brat series is set in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with all the nearby national parks, its views of the Grand Tetons. Jackson is one of the most beautiful places on earth. Lucky for me, I needed to do research in Jackson Hole to write this book. Therefore, I had a chance to interact with some of the nicest, friendliest people you'll ever meet. Jackson Hole Battalion Chief Fire Marshal Kathy Clay not only provided me with the information I needed to write about the firefighters in the town of Jackson, she also connected me with both male and female smoke jumpers who filled me in on the dangerous but necessary work, and a gesture of true friendliness to an out-of-towner. Kathy loaned me her pepper spray so I wouldn't get caught in unawareness by a grizzly while I hiked in the Grand Teton National Park. I'm eternally grateful to Leslie Gomez-Williams with the U.S. Forest Service and Noel Chip Gurdon, also with the U.S. Forest Service, both former smoke jumpers, for explaining the joys and dangers of jumping out of a plane to fight a raging forest fire. Both recommended Jumping Fire by Murray A. Taylor as a definitive book about smoke jumping. I found it both fascinating and enthralling. Thanks to Zachary Scott, a shop supervisor, technical administrator for Twin Otter, for generously providing technical advice about airplanes. Kudos to Nancy November Sloan, Rebel Marketing, for the amazing work she does on my newsletter and website. I want to thank Kathleen Sullivan for being my beta reader and helping me get this book consistent with previous books in King Brat series. As always, hugs to my sister Joyce for her willingness to be called at all hours as an expert resource for questions about spelling, grammar, and punctuation. Now, the note from the author. I always love reading these little notes from the author. Anyway, the note from the author says this. Dear faithful reader, I'm already hard at work working on the next book in the King's Brat series, Sullivan Promise, which tells you Victoria's story. Vic meets her match in Ryan Sullivan, a rancher who doesn't think much of her efforts to reclaim her wilderness habitat for the very predators killing his cattle. Sullivan's Promise also features Matt Greyhawk and his one true love, Jennifer Hart, and concludes Aiden and Leia's romance. And of course, she gives a little bit of a sample of Sullivan's Promise, which you're not going to get until I get the Sullivan's Promise book in the mail, read it, and then give you a book review. I've completed an audio recording. I did the reading for the first 3 books in my Bitter Creek series, The Cowboy, The Texan, and The Loner. They're now available from Audible. Enjoy. Several of my backlist Western novels are now available with gorgeous new covers. Look for Maverick Heart, Comanche Woman, and The Sweet Water Seduction wherever books are sold. I appreciate hearing comments, suggestions. You can reach me through my website at joanjohnston.com, at facebook.com, Joan Johnston Author, or on Twitter at Joan Johnston. I look forward to hearing from you. Happy reading, Joan Johnston. Well, now, Joan Johnston, surrender. After 4 book reviews, my longest book review ever, where I shared moments of the book, and I hope that it touched you so much that you go and find this book either in a library situation, Amazon, eBay, Walmart, your local Goodwill, Salvation Army, somewhere, anywhere books are sold. You won't regret this book. And I'm giving it a 20. You knew it was going to get a good book rating. It had 4 book reviews. So with that being said, love you all. I'm going to do a quick Dear Bombshell right after this.